Thank you. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you're signing in from. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be in what I think is one of the last few sessions of this India Science Festival. It's really fun for me. I'll introduce myself briefly and then briefly the other panelists. More personal introduction because I think they're all very well-known personalities. I'm Tarun Khanna. I'm a professor at Harvard for the last 30 odd years. Very interested, of course, in science and technology policy. Worked with Varun when we co-founded Aspiring Minds 10, 12 years ago. Great association, lovely to see this India Science Festival take off. I'm joined today by three colleagues and friends, Professor Venky Narayanamurti, who is a sort of mentor to me at Harvard, and really an eminent scientist, as well as a very successful administrator at the university in a variety of guises. Dr. Renu Swarup, who was secretary of DBT, and I had the privilege of working with her in many, many initiatives. And I must say she was a great support to many of the things that we tried to do in India, both whether it had a private sector lens or a public sector lens. And my friend Kris, Gopalakrishnan, co-founder of Infosys and chairman of Axilor Ventures. We're both working on Axilor for the last 7 or 8 years. So that's been a fun journey also. So it's really great to be here with all these friends. I propose that what we do is essentially cycle through. I'll make a few introductory comments right now and then hand off in the following sequence to my panelists. We'll first go to Venky. And Venky has a very nice book recently. It has a complex name, Venky, Genesis of Techno, I'm doing this from memory, Techno-Scientific Progress. So he's showing it to us, wonderful, from Harvard University Press. And really what he's, one of the things that really struck me about the summary of the book, because I haven't had a chance to look at it in detail, is that this idea that science always precedes technology is a little bit unfounded. There are plenty of examples throughout where it's really more of a symbiotic dance, right? That sometimes you have science leading to technological intervention, sometimes the technologies enable new scientific discoveries, and so on. So I'll ask Venky to set up the panel in that sense. And of course, Venky's been very involved in India for a long time, so he can bridge the divide, so to speak, between between his current institutional home and his and the context in India. Then we'll go to Kris. Kris, in his email comments to the panelists, reminded us that we just need more. We need more science. So the symbiosis is all good, Venky. Symbiosis is all great, but there has to be somebody to dance with. So if the private sector says the public sector isn't quite there, the public sector says the private sector isn't coming, then how do we catalyze this symbiosis, I guess, to put it in that way? And certainly the, spending as a percentage of GDP, both from the public and private sectors, is quite low. We all know that. And so what can we do, both in the private and public sector sides, to spur this? So Kris will give his perspective on that for a few minutes. And then we go to Renu at the end, because Renu's been at the fulcrum of bringing public and private sectors together, most notably recently with DBT, Department of Biotechnology. We all know BIRAC is a huge success story, but what lessons can be used more broadly from that to catalyze this symbiosis that we need in a variety of different dimensions? So that's it from me. So we'll go to Venky, maybe Venky 5-6 minutes, and then Kris, and then Renu, and then I'll try to moderate a short conversation. And feel free to type in the question and answer box. One of our colleagues from the Science Festival will moderate the questions, and then I can pick from there, and we can just have in effect, a virtual living room chat.
Thank you very much.
So thank you all for joining, and Venky, all yours for 5-6 minutes. And please allow me to interrupt if you guys are running.
Okay, yes, please, that's fine. Thank you very much, Tarun, for this kind introduction. First of all, I think Tarun was really kind. He has been absolutely fantastic at Harvard, because I'm, of course, been in the United States for 60 years now, and I'm an American citizen for a long time. I have 7 grandchildren. But the other country I have great love of is India. And Harvard did not have a significant thing in India until I would say the last decade or so. And Tarun has been a very great leader of the South Asia initiative of really building new linkages. That's one point. The second, I also noticed I haven't met Kris in person, but I think we know of each other. I served for many years on the part of the jury for engineering and computer science of the Infosys Science Foundation. So I do want to compliment that organization because of what they tried to do to advance Indian science in certain ways. So I think the other thing which I want to really spend some time on, my history, personal history, we won't go in detail, but I went to a liberal arts college in India, St. Stephen's College. I was a physics nerd who was part of the debating in other teams. I feel very strongly about liberal education. That's why I came to Harvard. Actually, in Santa Barbara, where I was dean, was a much better field in both in physics and materials physics, which is my field. But really, the undergraduates who came and the technologists who came out of which before Harvard had an engineering school, Gates, in fact, Mark Zuckerberg was a student while I was dean. And so it's just amazing how those things happened because you really had the very much. And I actually feel very strongly about changing liberal education. So there's a separate issue which we won't discuss in detail. The other thing which I'm very passionate about is actually about the nature of research. I grew up as a physicist, low temperature condensed, so-called pure physicist. And then Bell Labs taught me you just don't separate things out. You're always, but research is just as distinct from science. Science is about understanding the facts which are of the world. Engineering and technology is new forms and functions. And in fact, you study the world and you imagine and do new things. They feed on each other in all kinds of interesting ways. And research, science and technology are repositories of knowledge, but the evolution of science and technology feed on each other. And research is about that evolution. So think about the time-dependent evolution. And in fact, technology and science have a lot in common with biological evolution. These are complex adaptive systems. And that's really important to understand the synergy. So this is not against science or not against technology. Third, I'm also great passionate about history. If you look, India obviously has had islands of excellence since my young days. I mean, I started my career as a graduate student under K.S. Krishnan, and Raman and Krishnan are famous physicists, Satya Bose. So India has had islands of excellence comparable to the best in the world. But there has never been the kind of critical mass which is necessary today. Second, if you look at science and technology, much of it, the public support has been because of economics. The industry, and it goes back to its roots of the Industrial Revolution and the invention of the steam engine. The laws of thermodynamics happened because you wanted to make better steam engines, not the other way around. We must understand, in my time, the transistor happened because we were interested in building an amplifier and in fact, to also understand the physics of it, and they happen simultaneously. You don't separate research into basic and applied. There's no such thing. Research is about the unknown, something is unknown. So when Harvard did not have an engineering school, oh, that's not pure science, and it's done at MIT, as if MIT is not a great institution. MIT is one of the greatest institutions in the world. I had many arguments with Larry Summers, a great economist, as you know, and my president. And he said, Venky, the Bell Labs way is done in Silicon Valley. Harvard is going to be great in life sciences. Medicine is the most important field. And I said, Mr. President, you're right. It is an age where life science medicine will be important. But many of the advances will come from applied physics, from computer science, from engineering. And in fact, I said, engineering and biology have more similarities than physics and engineering, which is my field. Because engineered networks are human-created networks, biological networks occurred through natural evolution, and in fact, both of us can learn. And today in biology, we have fields like synthetic biology, biologically inspired engineering, computational biology. These fields have merged in all kinds of engineering. So in fact, we should not have this outmoded view of engineering or of science and be in the deeper union of these disciplines. So that's sort of my message number one. So India, if I look at, I have served on reviewing a little bit of the Indian Institute of Science, the National Physical Laboratory, and the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, all great institutions. And if you look back at India, I see that they started with private funding. Tata was very critical. Now Infosys is leading it in terms of the science. So I think the US, it also started partly from public, where Abraham Lincoln created what we call the great land grant state universities to influence agriculture. And then in a later period, it was Edison Laboratory. General Electric was started as Edison Laboratories, greatest inventor of all time. I am an admirer of Alexander Graham Bell. He is by far the greatest person in my mind, because he not only founded the Bell system, he started it because his mother was deaf, his wife was deaf, and he wanted to convert electricity into sound. And he always said, go off the beaten path, do something new. It is not about science, it's not about technology, it is about that union of how to change the world. So if India, which is a great country, has done certain things, in my view, quite well, some things which, again, because of great leaders. I have not looked at it carefully, but I certainly admire what has happened in space research. And India has done at low cost some very good things, and I can trace that to leaders like Vikram Sarabhai, and then Satish Dhawan and others who were great leaders. So I want to bring these points up because the great leadership becomes important. Second, obviously, in the biotechnology area, I think the pharma, there is like in vaccines and so on. But where we completely missed the boat was, I would say, in many aspects of manufacturing, especially in the field near to me in communications and computing. We've obviously done great in computer services, Infosys, Tata Computer Services as well, but we completely missed that communication and computer. And we can say it's now the age of software. We can all have small company, IPOs, etc. But you still need scale. The challenges in communication and computing are going to require the scale. It's going to require combining physics, electrical engineering, and computer science. It's not just going to be the software, it's going to be software and hardware. And today with quantum computing, that's happening. In fact, it's very important that we recognize this future. So I think Professor Dr. Gopalakrishnan can say much more about industry. I think the industrial involvement really becomes kind of important, and the universities must change as well. So there are whole issues of governance, leadership, review. It's all about the people, which we can spend hours on it. In this, and I think India has the score, but we just don't have the critical mass in these areas. So our strategy for manufacturing has to be a part, and we can never put it to the same scale as China or South Korea unless we have that manufacturing. Because in fact, it's really, really quite important. It's not just going to be the software. It is the real problem in the United States. They broke up AT&T because it said we'll have the little guys. Where is the MCI today? And today, the wireless community has only 3 people. They have Verizon, AT&T, and British Telecom, T-Mobile. So the point is there are issues of scale which are really important. And energy is so important, this is obviously health and agriculture, that energy is going to require a revolution. We know that. And how solar technologies, et cetera, has got to be a deeper union of science and technology. And India is very import dependent. So all of these features have to be thought through. And so the point is to build a critical mass, islands of, not just islands of excellence, but really a coherent strategy, which will require also sort of a further evolution of India's great institutions, including IITs, which obviously I've been paid a part. So we should probably spend some time discussing it as a group. So I think those sort of some initial messages, the role of manufacturing, university, industry, and in fact, the structure of universities. I just want to make one further thing. I really would appeal to our great industrialists that we really now invest in new ways for the long term. So in that sense, I'm very glad that Infosys is doing this piece, but they're in that kind of technological institutions. And that is really important, but they cannot be managing it because creative individuals. And Tarun, I have some differences in business school, maybe for large corporations, because research organizations require a certain different kind of governance and leadership. So when Gates gives the money to Harvard, he leaves me alone. I still am subject to review and evaluation, and this is important. So we want to have our great successful people, I don't know them, Ambani and others, to really create and give that freedom, etc., with finding those leaders, the Sarabhais, and etc. And that's the way we will succeed. That's the way I see China doing it. I see China has a bunch of technocrats from Tsinghua University, their MIT being part of it, those being changing now. And then they may have figured the golden rule of state-sponsored capitalism, but they're very free. It's amazing how much free they are when I visit China in doing this. Though, of course, it's changing now in the last couple of years, and so we don't, that jury is still out. But so that leadership becomes really important. So I think
okay, Venky,
governance and so on.
I'm going to interrupt. Thank you for that.
And that's it.
Passionate introduction.
Yeah, so I think we should
Perfect.
stop here and then really have a discussion. I would really love to hear Dr. Swarup. I don't know her. I knew Bhan very well. He was, I think he was sort of your predecessor. He was a very good strategic thinker. So I would love to hear a little more. And the governance does become important. The independence which you have from the political sphere, the National Science Foundation governance is separate. And that's really important because even the IITs, the governance structure is quite good, but still their political interference is too great. And we need to discuss that.
Okay, Kris, over to you. 5-6 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Tarun, and good morning, good evening to all of you. And thanks to FAST and India Science Festival for giving me this opportunity. I'm going to share my experiences based on my time with Infosys, where we created an industry in India, world-class industry in India. But to today's discussion, more relevant would be my experience in the last 6-7 years. After I stepped down from Infosys, I decided to get involved in supporting research. I got involved in supporting entrepreneurship, innovation and entrepreneurship in India. And I think that's what is relevant for today's discussion, because the topic is how can Indian science and technology contribute to the world in the next decade? I believe it can contribute significantly. Just during the pandemic, if things had gone according to plan, India would have actually supported the requirement for vaccine for around the world. Couple of missteps, but I still believe that India can definitely contribute significantly to the vaccine requirement for the world. It does so for other diseases, and we have done well in India because 1.5 billion plus people have been vaccinated, and for a poor country to develop these, design, develop, and manufacture these is a tremendous achievement. So India, how can India leverage this? Now, before I go into that, let me explain why I believe India's role is important. One, more number of people working on a problem is always better. Hopefully the problem will get solved faster. These are the people who are trained and have worked together, have the network with the best scientists in the world. So they are of the same mold, and they use similar equipment and things like that. So again, that's beneficial. The next reason is that India being a lower cost economy, the cost of research comes down. So I always say that for every $5 spent in the US, if $1 is spent in India, we can double the research output because more number of people can work alongside with these people, and we can double the research output. Different perspectives, again, hopefully will solve the problem. We represent 20% of the world's population. Again, that's very important in areas like healthcare, climate change, etc. So there are many reasons why India should actually contribute to science and technology. In the startup area, in the innovation and entrepreneurship area, India started to contribute. About $40 billion of funding has come. And this is what I'm going to use to actually now talk about what we need to do on the research side. And this is based on my experience. I created 6 chairs to create a new area, 3 at IISc, 3 at IIT Madras, These chairs are held by people from the US, people who head different laboratories. They spend some time in India, but rest of the time back in their laboratories. But they have created deep networks with young faculty and PhD students in India. And I also support joint PhDs with NTU and with other institutions and Indian Institute of Science and IIT Madras. And this way, we can actually accelerate collaboration. Over the last 6-7 years, I have contributed certain amount of money, but a multiple of that has been raised by these institutions from other sources, including now private sources like Gates Foundation, the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Initiative, the Fidelity Foundation, and things like that. So there is a way in which I believe we can get India networked into the rest of the world and contribute to very, very important problems of the world. Now, what are some of the things that we have tried? First thing is co-locating industry, academia, and research scientists at the same location. Example, IIT Madras Research Park. Today, it's probably one of the best ecosystems for research, innovation, and entrepreneurship in the country. We need to scale this up, replicate this. BIRAC, I am sure that Renu Swarup will talk about it. Again, a great mechanism structure for creating collaborations. Top down, we need to look at ease of doing research. We always talk about ease of doing business. I think very similar initiative has to happen in ease of doing research. We need to make icons of our scientists, just like we are making icons of our entrepreneurs. We need to, and that's what we're trying to do through Infosys Science Foundation Awards and things like that. We need to make sure that it's lucrative for scientists, and again, a lot of scholarships, a lot of research funding is now happening. That is increasing, but we need to increase funding into research, both from government, but more importantly from private sources. Industry and philanthropy must contribute, and we must attract global funding for research. The lesson from the startup industry is that we are attracting significant amount of global funding into the startup ecosystem. Why can't we do that in the research ecosystem? It's all same set of people, same mold, as I said. We need to brand and market research in India. World-class research, I'm confident in saying, is being done in India. Of course, not to the numbers that we want, but it is happening. So how can we brand, how can we market this such that it attracts the right funding and it starts scaling up? India has become the third best ecosystem for startups. I strongly believe that we can do that in the research area. If you look at global research centers of multinational organizations, they're located in India. Why? Why are they located in India? Because world-class research, again, can be done in India, and they strongly believe that the talent that's available at the scale that is required is available in India. So again, that's another reason why I believe that this can be done. Bottom-up initiatives are required. We need to pick and choose research labs, individual scientists, areas of research, and support these. And then these islands will actually start becoming bigger and bigger and start actually becoming institutes and organizations, etc. Because India has done well in certain areas, in the area of biotech, in the area of space science, in the area of atomic research. We have done very well in the area of generics, in the area of vaccine. So we have to pick and choose areas and start investing in these areas, both domestically and internationally, and scale these up. I strongly believe that it can be done. That's my experience. And India can play a very important role in developing new knowledge, developing new products, and coming out with a better society. Last point I want to make in why India should do this is because the 20th century model of development has not brought us results that we want. We have created a unequal world. We have created a climate crisis. We have created problems of access and things like that. It's not inclusive, and we have not done well in terms of making sure that the products are affordable to 7 billion people. This is an opportunity for India to create a science and technology infrastructure that will be relevant for 7 billion people in the world. Just look at the vaccine. The initial vaccines that came were not affordable, cannot be actually logistically distributed in developing countries. And that again pointed to India's role. So I'll stop here. I strongly believe that India can contribute, India should contribute, and I have some experience in the last 6-7 years of India contributing, and much longer in India contributing to the IT industry of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kris. Renu, let's get your perspective for the next 5-6 minutes, and then there's a bunch of questions already. I'll moderate it and pose them. In the interest of time, I'll just go straight to the questions, but please go ahead, Renu.
Thank you so much, Tarun, and good morning and good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here as part of this wonderful discussion that we are having, that what is the Indian S&T really going to be or contribute in the next decade. And as my fellow panelists have said, there is huge potential for India to contribute over the next decade. And how do we say that? We say that because we really have to look at what has been the growth trajectory of the Indian science over the last few years. So if you look at it, I think it's important first to understand how have we actually fared in the last few years. And when I say about how have we fared in the science in terms of each of the parameters, which is so important and crucial. What really has been our investment into the science? Has that really grown over these years? What is the key capacity that we've built, both in terms of human resource and infrastructure? Where do we actually stand in terms of the innovation? I mean, we're talking about a lot of science, but is there innovation that's happening that would allow India to be a leader in science, or is it just going to be a follower and take on generics and other aspects to that? And more importantly, where are we really looking at the quality of our scientific outputs? Rightly said, Venky, where is our critical mass? Do we actually have that critical mass to move on? So if you just sort of look at that growth trajectory, I think it's important to see that, yes, if you see our investments have sort of stood at about 0.7, 0.8% of the GDP. So that really hasn't been too much of a growth in that sense. But it's also very important to note here that constantly over the last few years, this 0.7 or 0.8% of the GDP actually has about 60% of the public funding and less than about 40% of the private sector funding. So if this has to grow, there has to be some change in this aspect. If you look at other countries which have larger spends in terms of their GDP, you do see that the situation may not be reversed, but it's at least a 50-50 between public and private. So there have to be ways in which we attract the private sector funding, incentivize the private sector funding. But then there's also an important factor that we need to consider. Even if we increase our spend on the science and technology, on the R&D, do we actually have capacities within our university system, within our research ecosystem to absorb that spend? I think that is something that's very important. In fact, if you actually trace out what the investment has been, you'll see that per million researcher, the investment may actually be going higher if we've seen over the years. So what does that imply? That actually means that we do not have a critical mass there to be able to absorb that spend, because we haven't really gone ahead in terms of our GDP. That takes us to a very important aspect, is how do we build that critical mass? What is it that we do to incentivize them to take on to science? And are we going to look at expanding our footprint across the country? You talk in terms of numbers. Now, when you talk in terms of numbers, I think numbers we can expand, but is the quality is what we need to focus on. So we need to see that over these years, what we have done, if we just move in the same pace, if we go on to the next decade, I think it's going to be an incremental increase in terms of it. Rightly said, we need to scale where we've seen success. And that, if India has to make a difference in the global arena, it has to be an exponential scale up in sectors where we've seen success. And I think that exponential growth that we will see will have to be in terms of looking at building a critical mass. We've done a lot. In fact, recently in the last few years, we've actually tried to see how we create this leadership. And DBT, the department that I've been with so many years, we've actually tried to build these postdoc young investigator grants. We've tried to create a very vibrant startup ecosystem. When you talk about a startup ecosystem, that's where the young minds come in. And we've had, BIRAC has been referred to by a couple of you. Yes, BIRAC has been a wonderful model. And BIRAC came from the government system. It wasn't a model that was set up by the private sector. It was set up by the government. It's a wholly owned company of the government. But what did BIRAC do? It engaged with the private sector. It engaged with them to see. It sort of blurred the boundaries between academia and industry. But what was important there, and what BIRAC still continues to do, is to ignite the young minds, to incentivize that research. What has made the maximum impact in BIRAC? It's a $100,000 grant that is given for an ignition. But what that does is that encourages young students from IITs, from colleges to come forward. And now today we see that footprint expanding across the country. This is not just for biotech sector. We need to do this in all sectors where we can make a difference. And I think that's crucial, that's critical, that we need to create this critical mass of young scientific future leaders. Because our science in the future is only going to depend upon how we take these future leaders. And I am a firm believer that unless and until we create this critical mass of future leaders, we may keep envisioning our policies, our strategies, our implementation plans, but you need workforce to implement it. And that's going to happen only when we take it forward. The second most important aspect is, what are those models of partnership that we're going to look at? Because one thing is very clear, that we are looking at science and technology of the future. It is an interdisciplinary science area. It's an area where you need to have cutting edge research, but very important, the knowledge generation, the basic research, going right through the translational phase to be able to give you products in the end, which are affordable, accessible, and rightly said by Kris, not just to India, but for the world. We've already demonstrated it. We've had a large number of products where we've had innovations in India, which are innovations for the world. Most of our innovations in the healthcare sector that our startups have taken on, we're actually now seeing how well they're being deployed across the borders in Africa and other developing countries. So we do need to look at these partnership models. And these partnership models, PPP models that we've spoken about, which are doing well. And as I've said, it's not just the biotech sector. We are seeing it happening in space. We are seeing it happening in the energy sector now. I think these need to be scaled up. Agriculture, healthcare, clean energy. These are areas where we need to see how we scale them up and we take it forward. The other crucial aspect is, when we are looking at partnership models, what are those international partnership models? Because if you have to be relevant in science globally, international models of partnership have to really be one of our key success criteria. And we've done well in the last few years. Our centers of excellence that many of our national institutes have built, these have been in collaboration. Our scientists, our researchers have been able to attract a lot of international funding. But it's also important to see that they have now been able to attract not only international funding from philanthropic grants, but also in terms of many of our bilateral funding opportunities. So that shows that we are making a difference there in areas which are of relevance globally. In addition to the capacities that we build for the human resource, I think the cutting edge research infrastructure. And over these last few years, India has invested in cutting edge infrastructure. And that is also important because if you need to create centers of excellence within the country, if you need to attract scientists to come to the country to be able to build these centers around them, you do need to make available to them cutting edge infrastructure for their research. And I think that is what we have focused on. And that's something that we would like to see. Yes, I think it's important for us if we are now looking at where India is going to be in the next decade. A clear test bed for us was the COVID case. Whatever we invested in the last few years, how did we respond at COVID times? And I think we've been really pleased to see that India did respond at COVID times. There were S&T solutions that came out very easily. And this was because we had made these investments. What did we see happening in COVID time? We saw wonderful collaborations, not just internationally, but nationally, between academia, between industry, between startups. Seamless flow of information. At time of need, they all came together. But it wasn't sudden that these collaborations came in. This ecosystem had been built, this ecosystem had been created. So we do have this robust ecosystem, which is now ready to respond to crisis, not just a crisis of a pandemic, but to other challenges which we need, whether it's healthcare, whether it's agriculture, whether it's energy. We also saw the startups responding so beautifully. In fact, if today India is self-reliant in its diagnostic kits, it's because of the startup ecosystem. Our PPEs, our ventilators, it was all done by the startups. So this is where our ecosystem responded, and this gives us confidence that that's really where India is going to move forward in this PPP model, which is no longer just public, but it's a public-private partnership which brings the startups. So we've created these wonderful clusters where you have, as Kris said, the startups, the academia, the industry, all co-located. So what is it that we need to do? Where are we positioning ourselves? Yes, definitely our strategy, our STI policy, which should be out anytime now from the government, which is a consultative process, says India is positioning itself in the top 5 nations in the next couple of years. But is it just the positioning that we are looking at? Is it just the innovation ranking that we are looking at? I think it's the S&T solutions that we provide to the world. Whether it's healthcare, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's AMR, whether it's agriculture, whether it's new cutting edge areas of building our science capacities. In newer areas that we talk about, the space research, you're talking about quantum computing, you're talking about cell and regenerative medicine, you're talking a number of areas like this. I think, yes, that's where we would like to see how we could build capacities for affordable and accessible products, which we can make available. But most importantly, how are we going to position ourselves in terms of being able to achieve that? And as I said, we need to expand our footprint. We need to go to the tier 2, tier 3 cities. We need to invest now in high risk R&D. I think the investments so far are coming in terms of entrepreneurial ecosystems, in terms of where you see products coming in. But I think it's important that we also attract and mobilize philanthropic funds in terms of these high risk in basic research areas. Because unless and until you invest in this knowledge generation, you're not going to be able to build that pool of researchers who's going to give you that translational ecosystem to move forward. The last point that I would like to mention here is, as I've said, while we build these centers of excellence so that India can contribute in terms of capacities and infrastructure, I think we should not lose focus on those global benchmarks of quality. Because unless and until we do that, as I said, we could, being such a large country, we could have millions of young researchers that we just pull out because of investments coming in, but we do need to keep our focus on the quality benchmarks. We need to see that how are we going to continue to keep our focus on basic research and keeping the momentum on the translational research as well. I think that is something which is important, because many a times we tend to sort of be skewed in one direction. We either go totally towards the basic or totally towards the translational. I think keeping that seamless flow of information of investment, of our focus on, and for everything, for leadership, for building the pool, building the startup ecosystem. And thirdly, and most importantly, we need to be more and more innovative on the models of partnership that we look at.
Renu, sorry, I need to cut in here because I'm getting anxious notes from
that was my last point, Tarun. I was just closing.
Thank you, Renu.
That we could really take this forward with this, and that's really
wonderful.
Your position. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Renu, and thank you, Kris and Venky. So, I'm going to go straight to the Q&A. To the moderators, can my panelists see the Q&A also? You can see it, right? If you, in any case, I'm going to pick one or two. So, one of the themes that's running through the Q&A is how can we ignite interest in science amongst the youth, right? Amongst young would-be researchers, building that's part of building the capacity issue. It connects to a number of things that all three panelists said. Renu was just talking about the capacity issue, of course. Venky, you spoke about the liberal arts being an important catalyst to getting science to think about practical problems in society. Kris, in your own way, you were talking about making celebrities of scientists rather than only cricketers and Bollywood stars. So that's a theme in the questions. That thread is running in a variety of different ways. So let me see, and I have to request you to give very crisp answers because we have 10, 15 questions to get through. Let's not do a long monologue. So anybody on quick thoughts on practical steps that we can do to kind of make it, for want of another word, very sexy to do science?
So, I talked about increasing the limelight on science and scientists, branding and marketing, just like we have done on entrepreneurs and the startup founders. We need to increase the funding. We need to look at leadership development and proper training to the leaders in the science community. And we need to look at institution building, where when we talked about governance, administration, and things like that. All of these things, together must be taken. A standard process for succession planning, how promotions happen through merit, all of these things. Answers are not. It's patchy in terms of its implementation. There are some good institutes, but we need more, and we need to probably go towards a technology-based system to administer the HR processes in our research organizations. Probably it is required in government in general.
Okay, great. Kris, thanks. Venky?
A couple of things here. Obviously, the issue for me, I showed all my students at Harvard President Kennedy's speech in 1962 at Rice University of why US wanted to go to the moon. It's a very, it makes goosebumps fly. Because said, why are you wasting your money going to the moon? It's a barren place. He said, no, you must do something which is far out, which is the unknown, etc. And it is, in fact, a frontier. Of course, over a period of time, there will be lots of. So we do need leadership at the very top to say this is important. So in a certain time, Nehru, we can have our pluses and minuses. He did create the IITs with a certain thing, merit-based, etc. I think some of it has been, and some things they didn't do right. So that leadership is important with as an icon. Today's world in the US, so I came at that time as a young graduate student. I'm a lot older than most people in this audience here. And it really attracted a lot of people to science and engineering. So one thing which I think India could do, the governance issues are really important. I think Kris was sort of, and the partnerships, et cetera, and the private sector, is Gates and Jobs are also iconic figures. They're real technocrats. And so I think we do need to sort out, so what Infosys is doing, Narayanamurti, Kris, and so on, as part of it, but we need to get many more of them, that they really turn out that these are that's important. And third, I don't think I'm too old now, we're not using the Indian diaspora. I see China, it's caused a lot of problems. They have been very aggressive. When I was a youngster, I felt that India has changed remarkably. If I were now in India, I would be working in India. You should know that, because when I was there, we used to have rationing, food was a problem, and all these people may not know it, most of the people, because believe me, water was a problem even. It's in Mumbai, which is the most advanced city. So I think it really is important that we attract the diaspora. In the US, engineering schools are dominated by two ethnic groups, Chinese and Indians. You look at Indians doing in the US, including the technology companies, etc. We do need to somehow get the younger group, and I think Dr. Swarup was sort of as part of the thing. They can't be holier than thou. You have to really care about India. Indian conditions are different from the US and so on. But I think there are enough people who are that kind. So we need to have more proactive somehow. We've had fits and starts in this, but it has not really been a coherent. For China, it was a national strategy, coming right from the top.
That is so Venky, that's a practical response to the question, right? One instrument that's available to glamorize potentially is to take iconic figures who may have some connection with India.
And I think one thing which Kris was referring to, the big multinational companies, they in China really had and many of them have created good R&D enterprises. This includes in Delhi. I had a postdoc, Ajinkya, who's now in Delhi, actually look at those. And we need to embrace them a little more. We had too much, because of our past of self-sufficiency and so on, taken to the extreme. So I think there are
let me jump in here. Kris, here's a practical idea. And tell me if it's crazy, right? What if we take a cricketer, right? And talk about how you can apply principles of physics, for instance, to improving, I don't know, the stroke or the material in the willow in the bat or something, and have him or her, if it's a female cricketer who has celebrity status, I don't know who that would be, endorse scientists who are working on it. Similarly with Bollywood, right? There's so many special effects. I mean, the science and computational needs, as you know, in graphics these days, with NVIDIA and all these companies,
Tarun,
take the scientist, take the problem, marry it, no?
So Tarun, these are all happening now in India. You will be happy to know. So just take cricket alone. Anil Kumble has created a startup, which uses a very small sensor and camera at the stem to actually photograph the stroke, and in real time actually can tell you where the ball would go, how far it would go, what are the mistakes the batsman is making, and complete analysis. And it's all science and scientists and things like that. So this is starting to happen, and so that's why on the startup side, on the innovation side, I'm actually I've seen the scale turn towards world-class and very innovative products. What we need is in the deep tech side, on the development of new knowledge side. Of course, this is applied knowledge, but we need to look at new knowledge and in our academic institutions and scientific institutions, we need quality and quantity improvement.
So, Kris, just with that great, sorry, one sec.
Just one thing on this point. I want what Kris had mentioned. It's important with this time that these chairs which they created is a very good thing. That is a way of doing it. That's how, in fact, I changed Harvard as well. So, Kris, I know the one in the Institute of Science, which Anurag Kumar had invited me. And of course, this will take a time, but it's a very good thing to do it that way. And that's the way industry can pay and so on. And they will make some mistakes, but that's all right.
Jump in. Renu, jump in.
So, Tarun, I think what Kris was saying, that we need to also now bring into the deep tech. I think we need to incentivize that part of the research by incentivizing blue sky research, letting the youngsters know that, well, if you have a crazy idea, there is funding for it. So if you can do that, then you can attract them, because you need that message to go out very strongly that science is relevant for a large number of solutions that you provide. And they do come up with crazy ideas, but we don't have high-risk funding is sufficient enough available. So I think that has to move, and you will be able to attract a lot of youngsters with that.
But how do we do that, Renu? You're the government person.
So that's what I said. It's not always the government.
You can't only say industry has to step up, because even government is so low.
Government has been doing it. Renu, you should talk about your Genome India initiative.
Absolutely.
The National Mission on Interdisciplinary Cyber Physical Systems, 25 labs across the country, 3,600 crores.
Great.
It's starting to happen. Now we need private sector participation, right? Philanthropic participation. I am pushing very hard to make that happen. Government also has announced the National Research Foundation, 50,000 crores funding. So government is hearing and starting to respond, and people like Renu have led this from the front. If there is one, let's say, star in our this thing, that's in the biotech space.
Yeah, so I think what is important is the government plays the role of a catalyst. The government, that risk mitigation, you put your foot forward, but once that is done, then you need the others to come forward. It can't be totally
of course.
That's really the role that the government is currently playing, and we hope that with that we'll be able to attract and mobilize a lot of other players into it. So there's some level of risk mitigation that's already happened.
Okay, so we spoke about the amazing stuff that were happening, whether it's Anil Kumble or the private sector or BIRAC or government's investment. What Kris also brought up another point, and Venky did too, about connectivity to the rest of the world. Actually, Renu did also, in saying we have to benchmark with quality standards. So talk to me briefly. We only have 3-4 minutes left, but if each of you could say something about something that could be done about either deepening connection. I routinely get invitations to spend a year at Beda or Chingwa, routinely, on my terms. So Tarun, I've never gotten anything from India.
Tarun, it's starting to happen. It's growing. It probably will need to. So the biggest challenge is we can't match the salary of a US university right now. The universities in India are able to scale it up to maybe 1.5 times or 2 times what an IIT would pay. That's acceptable, but that's probably not incentive enough for somebody to relocate from the US. And that's the reason why I have created these chairs, which are part-time chairs, not full-time. And we take care of the complete expenses, and we give them some money which they can spend whichever way they want during their time in India. There are no strings attached. And that's way to actually scale this up and bring more collaboration. Joint PhD is another way. I'm supporting joint PhDs with NTU. We have done postdocs with CMU. So we need to scale this up, and Tatas are also doing that. Tata Trusts are also doing that in terms of sponsoring PhD students to go abroad, postdocs to come to India. We need to do that. I will also say one more thing. A good outcome of tightening the FCRA funding, I see some of the philanthropic foundations now redirecting their money to research organizations. So that's an interesting development. Suddenly,
that's
they can't direct it to NGOs, so they're directing it to research organizations.
And,
very quick comments from Renu and Venky. Renu, you go first.
Yeah, so Tarun, I think one way it's already started happening is even through these bilateral cooperations that we have, the government to government cooperations, we've actually been able to build these connected centers. So these connected centers are, so what is important is we need to institutionalize these mechanisms of cooperation rather than making them just individual based. As Kris said, sometimes it's not easy to afford that, sort of scientists to come in from outside by a university. But if it happens under a bilateral arrangement, then it's much simpler because it works out. So we've done it for a couple of countries, but I think we need to do more of that. That will help joint PhDs, joint educational programs. We've done this, we've had with Germany, we've had with the US, we've had with UK, a number of them. And I think we need to do more of those. So that's one way of making these connections.
That's terrific. That's terrific.
I would like to
Last
address
comment, Venky. You have the last comment.
One point with regard to India, because India has now created the National Research Foundation. In fact, Anurag Kumar is going to be in touch with me because of how to help with young people. I think the National Science Foundation in the US has various programs, the GOLI for reaction with industry, engineering research centers, etc., which require. So I think that must happen. You've got these big companies, Wipro, including Infosys, etc. Infosys is doing great because through the Science Foundation, but there can be all these other things as well, where industrial scientists may come and spend it, and that's how their R&D will occur, including with the multinationals. So I think the government must initiate, be the seed for that. That's what the NSF does, and that should happen more and more.
I should give a shout out to my good friend and colleague Vijay Raghavan, who is the principal science advisor, who's been catalyzing all these very interesting clusters, right, in different cities, like Pune, Hyderabad.
And he's a very good person in this because he did the National Center for Biological Sciences, which is one of the very good world-class places in India. These islands of excellence.
Yes. Okay. Listen, very engaging discussion. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Renu, Kris, Venky, for taking time and engaging in a spirited back and forth. Wish we had more time. And thank you, Varun, and the team at ISF and FAST India.